This was not just a war of trenches and artillery. It wasn't fought only with bayonets and barbed wire, poison gas clouds, or the thunder of machine guns echoing across no man's land. World War I was also a shadow financial war, one waged silently in the vaults of gold reserves. The volatile swings of bond markets, the marble halls of central banks, and the dimly lit, cigar smoke-filled offices of financiers who orchestrated empires from afar, never once hearing the whistle of a shell or the cry of a dying soldier on the battlefield. The soldiers paid in blood, millions of them, from the muddy fields of the Somme to the frozen peaks of the Alps. But the bankers, industrialists, and governments? They were calculating balance sheets, projecting interest rates, and maneuvering currencies like generals moving divisions on a map. What they did in those fateful years from 1914 to 1918 didn't just determine who won and who lost on the military front. It fundamentally rewired the global financial system in ways that echo through every economic crisis you face today, trapping generations in cycles of debt, inflation, and illusion. If you think war is simply about politics, armies, and territorial conquests, think again. The First World War proved beyond doubt that money is a weapon and one of the deadliest ever invented. It can bankrupt nations without firing a shot, erode savings overnight, and turn patriotic fervor into a tool for extracting wealth from the masses. In this extended exploration, we'll dive deep into the hidden ledgers of 1914, trace the money trails that shaped the 20th century, and connect the dots to your life in 2025. Buckle up, this is the story history books gloss over, but your wallet feels every day. The powder keg of 1914. Financial realities beneath the rhetoric. Europe in 1914 was already a tinderbox of tensions. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo on June 28 was the spark. But the fuel had been piling up for decades. Intense national rivalries between powers like Germany and Britain, sprawling colonial ambitions in Africa and Asia, and a web of military alliances, the Triple Entente, Britain, France, Russia, versus the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Ottoman Empire, that turned any local conflict into a continental catastrophe. Beneath the bombastic speeches about national honor, imperial glory, and defending alliances lay a colder, more calculating reality. War on this unprecedented scale was financially impossible without borrowing sums that dwarfed entire economies. Pre-war military budgets were already straining treasuries. Britain's navy, the largest in the world, cost £44 million annually just to maintain. Germany's army expansions under Kaiser Wilhelm II had ballooned to over 800,000 men in peacetime. But mobilizing millions, producing shells by the billions, and sustaining a multi-year conflict? That required unimaginable capital. When leaders like Britain's Prime Minister Herbert Asquith, France's Raymond Poincaré, or Germany's Chancellor Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg chose war in those frantic July days, they weren't just committing to battle. They were signing their nations up for generational debt. Yet, astonishingly, most believed it would be a short affair. Home before the leaves fall, Kaiser Wilhelm reportedly said. Over by Christmas, echoed British officials. They'd planned to fund it the traditional way, dipping into gold reserves, issuing short-term treasury bills, soliciting limited loans from domestic banks, and rallying patriotic donations from citizens eager to support the cause. This optimism was rooted in the 19th century experience of quick wars like the Franco-Prussian War of 1870–71, which lasted mere months and was funded largely by victory indemnities. But World War I shattered that model. Within weeks of August 1914, as armies clashed in the Battle of the Marne and the race to the sea, the illusion evaporated. The war wasn't burning through budgets, it was incinerating them. The gold standard, the fragile anchor of global finance. To understand the financial earthquake, we must grasp the pre-war system, the classical gold standard, a cornerstone of international finance since the 1870s. Under this regime, major currencies, British pound, French franc, German mark, US dollar, were pegged to gold at fixed rates. For example, 1 pound equals 7.32 grams of gold, $1 equals 1.5 grams of gold, 1 mark equals 0.358 grams of gold. Governments promised that any holder of paper money could redeem it for physical gold at the central bank. This imposed discipline. You couldn't print money willy-nilly without depleting reserves, as excessive issuance would trigger gold outflows and force deflationary corrections. Nations hoarded gold in vaults like Fort Knox precursors. Britain held about 40 million pounds in gold at the Bank of England. France had around 1 billion francs in gold. Germany's Reichsbank boasted 1.2 billion marks. The US, emerging as an industrial giant, had amassed over $1 billion by 1914. These reserves seemed ample for a short war. But mobilization changed everything. Armies swelled. Germany, 3.8 million men by late 1914. Britain, from 250,000 to over 1 million, via Kitchener's new army. France, 3.8 million. Russia, a staggering 5.5 million. Industry pivoted to war production, factories churning out rifles. Britain produced 4 million by war's end, artillery shells, over 200 million for the Allies alone, and munitions. Daily costs exploded. Let's crunch the numbers for precision. Germany, by December 1914, daily expenditure hit 10 to 12 million marks, equivalent to $2.5 million then, or about $70 million in 2025 dollars adjusted for inflation. Britain started at 1 million pounds per day. By 1916, £5 to 7 million daily, 2.5 million pounds early on, but escalating rapidly. France, around 20 million francs daily by late 1914. Total first-year costs, Allies $10 billion. Central Powers $5 billion. Pre-war annual budgets were a fraction of this. Britain's entire 1913 budget was £200 million. Gold reserves? Britain's covered maybe 2 to 3 months at peak burn rates. The math was merciless. Gold would run out. Governments faced a stark choice: halt the war, politically impossible, or break the rules. They chose the latter. Starting in August 1914, Britain suspended gold convertibility for exports on August 4. France followed on August 1. Germany on July 31st. Even neutral US saw strains, though it maintained the standard longer. This wasn't announced with fanfare, but through quiet moratoriums on gold payments. Paper money became fiat-backed not by metal, but by faith in the state. Central banks like the Bank of England began issuing unbacked notes. Printing presses hummed. This suspension of the gold standard was a seismic shift. It untethered money from physical limits, allowing governments to finance deficits via inflation and borrowing. Economists like John Maynard Keynes, then a young Treasury advisor, warned of the dangers, but war trumped caution. The genie was out. Governments discovered they could create money at will. And once tasted, this power was addictive. They never fully returned. The financial front lines, how each power fought with money, with gold off the table. The war became a battle of borrowing, printing, and persuasion. Each belligerent adapted differently, revealing strengths, weaknesses, and the seeds of future catastrophes. Germany, patriotism as a pyramid scheme isolated. By the British naval blockade, which cut off 90% of imports by 1916, Germany couldn't access global markets. Foreign loans? Impossible. Their strategy: massive domestic war loans. From September 1914, the Reich launched 9 Kriegsanleihen war bond campaigns. Propaganda blitz. Posters showed Iron Cross-adorned soldiers with slogans like Zeichnet Kriegsanleihen. Subscribe to war loans. Door-to-door appeals. Women urged to melt wedding rings into gold for the fatherland. Promises: 5 to 6% interest, repayable post-victory with enemy indemnities. Citizens responded enthusiastically at first. Middle-class savers, workers, even peasants poured in funds. Total raised: over 100 billion marks. $25 billion then. $600 billion today. But it was unsustainable. To meet interest, Germany printed more money. Reichsbank notes tripled by 1918. Inflation crept. 1914 bread loaf equals 0.30 marks. By 1918 equals 0.60 marks. Defeat in November 1918 rendered bonds worthless. Hyperinflation loomed in 1923. Peak, 300 billion marks for a loaf. Millions lost everything. This economic despair fueled resentment, paving the way for the Weimar Republic's instability and the rise of Adolf Hitler. Financial scars birthed political monsters. Britain, leveraging empire and the City of London. Britain's ace. The City of London, the world's financial hub since the 18th century. Sterling was the reserve currency. British banks like Barclays and Lloyds had global reach. The empire provided raw materials and manpower. India alone contributed 1.5 million troops and £100 million in gifts loans. Funding phases. Early, 1914. Treasury bills, short-term debt, gold shipments from colonies. 2. Mid-war. Patriotic appeals. Your country needs you, extended to wallets. National war bonds offered 4 to 5% interest. 3. Global borrowing. Crucially, turning to America. U.S. neutrality in 1914 was official, but economically tilted allied. Wall Street firms, led by J.P. Morgan and Co., became procurement agents. Arranged $2.3 billion in loans by 1917, pre-U.S. entry. 1. Managed $10 billion plus in allied purchases, 4,000 ships, 20 million tons of steel, 1 billion shells. Fees. Morgan earned $30 million, $700 million today. Britain pawned assets. Sold U.S. securities worth $1 billion, shipped gold $500 million. By 1917, Britain was $4.3 billion in U.S. debt. This shifted power. America from debtor, owing Europe $3.7 billion pre-war to creditor nation. Post-war, Britain's attempt to restore gold in 1925 at pre-war parity, £1 equals $4.86, was disastrous. Overvalued pound crushed exports, cost deflation. Prices fell 10 to 15%, unemployment hit 11%. Keynes' 1925 tract, The Economic Consequences of Mr. Churchill lambasted it as the most important financial blunder of the century. Workers struck in the 1926 general strike. Ordinary Britons suffered while elites dreamed of imperial revival. France. Savers sacrificed, dependency born. France, haunted by 1871's 5 billion franc indemnity to Prussia, had built the Maginot Line precursor mentality. Pre-war gold hoard, world's largest per capita. Runks, perpetual bonds at 3 to 5%. French rentiers, savers, bought eagerly culture of thrift. Domestic total, approximately 80 billion francs. But insufficient. Turn to allies and U.S. Morgan loans, $1.5 billion plus. France shipped gold $500 million and sold assets. By armistice, $3.4 billion owed to U.S., plus $3 billion to Britain. Post-war, France pushed harsh Versailles terms to recoup. But dependency bred tension. U.S. demanded repayment during 1930s depression, exacerbating France's woes. Russia. The collapse that shook the world. Russia's empire was a giant with clay feet. Vast territory, but backward. 70% illiterate, industry nascent. Gold reserves. 1.2 billion rubles, impressive. But logistics failed. Borrowed heavily. 8 billion rubles from France-Britain. Mobilization chaos. 15 million men, but rifles for only 4.5 million initially. Inflation. Ruble lost 80% value by 1917. Bread riots in Petrograd sparked February Revolution. Bolsheviks seized power in October, renouncing Tsarist debts, 11 billion rubles. World's largest default. Financial ruin toppled monarchy, birthed communism, altered history. America. The quiet winner. U.S. entered April 1917, but profited from 1914. Exports to allies. $800 million, 1914. To $6 billion, 1916. Gold inflows, $2 billion plus. Post-war, held 40% of world gold. Liberty bonds, raised $21 billion domestically. But real game, geopolitical shift. Europe owed US $10 billion plus. The war's end. Balance sheets in ruins, November 11, 1918. Armistice. Military casualties, 16 million dead, 21 million wounded. Financial toll. Allies. $140 to $150 billion spent. $3.5 trillion today. Central powers. $60 to $70 billion. Total debt $200 billion plus. Gold standard. Dead. Currencies inflated 200 to 300%. Circular debt. U.S. lent Germany, Dawes Young plans. $2 billion. Gives Germany paid reparations. $5 billion actual. Gives Allies paid US when Wall Street crashed, chain broke. Depression. 25% unemployment, bank runs. Echoes in 2025. The 1914 playbook lives on. Governments learned. Suspend rules, print, borrow, propagandize. World War II US Lend-Lease. $50 billion. 1971. Nixon ends gold convertibility fiat era fully born. 2008. Bailouts $700 billion TARP, QE $4 trillion plus Fed balance sheet. COVID, $6 trillion US stimulus, global debt $300 trillion. Today. Inflation transitory? Debt ceilings raised 78 times since 1960. Central banks hold $30 trillion assets. You pay. Via 8% plus inflation 2022 peak. Negative real yields eroding savings. Taxes funding interest. US spends $1 trillion year on debt service. Real wealth, gold, skills, land not fiat illusions. Conclusion. History rhymes, listen closely. The 1914 financial war wasn't a sideshow. It was the main event reshaping power. Bankers won, savers lost, elites recycled debts. Masses bore inflation. In 2025, as CBDCs loom and debts soar, remember, money untethered is manipulation, knowledge is your shield. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The balance sheets don't lie. Word count, 2012. If this opened your eyes, subscribe. More hidden histories await.